Just before Rock Hudson divorced his wife Phyllis Gates, the heartbroken woman made a secret recording of their most intimate conversation. Its contents would have ruined the actor, but more on this later. Like so many other old Hollywood stars, Rock Hudson's extremely hunky name wasn't actually his real one. He was born as Roy Harold Scherer Jr. on November 17, 1925. His parents, Catherine and Roy Harold Sr., were of hardy working class stock, but as we'll see, Little Rock's childhood was anything but idyllic. During the Great Depression, the Scherer family fell on extremely hard times, and Roy Sir even lost his job as an auto mechanic. When this crisis happened, Rock's father put his son through utter torment. The patriarch quickly abandoned the family before his son turned 4 years old, and sadly, the very worst was yet to come. From a young age, Hudson learned some cold, hard lessons. When he told his father he wanted to be an actor, Roy Sir reportedly physically hit his young son. According to one of Hudson's biographers, after this incident and others like it, he learned that he could talk about pretty much anything except what you truly felt. Sadly, his tormented childhood had a big chilling effect on him. In high school, Hudson was very far from his seductive image. He spent most of his time delivering newspapers and performing in his local glee club. Most people who knew him back then remembered him as a quiet boy, and even when he was famous, people called him a pathologically shy man. But beneath his reserved exterior, young Hudson had a penchant for scandal, even then. As a young man, Hudson joined the Navy for a brief period of time, and there's evidence that he fathered at least one child while serving. In 2014, a woman named Susan Dent surfaced, claiming she was his long-lost daughter. But on the other hand, other sources claim he actually fathered 2 daughters with 2 different women during this period. This was Hudson's first scandal, but it was far from his last. Poor Rock couldn't catch a break for much of his young adult life. While trying to pursue an acting career in Los Angeles, he had to work a bunch of side jobs to make ends meet. And when he applied to study drama at the University of Southern California, they rejected him because of his bad grades. For Hudson, his thirst for success was only a losing game. That's when his desperation took a dark turn. Hudson was so desperate to become a star, he went to chilling lengths to get Hollywood to notice him. Not only did he have his teeth capped and take up acting lessons, he also reportedly had his voice surgically lowered. This had an intense side effect. It robbed him of any decent singing voice. And Hudson avoided most musicals in his career. But with his new look and seductive voice, Hudson continued to chase down an elusive acting career. Willing to do anything to get his foot in the door, he came up with a not-so-subtle strategy. Hudson never gave up on his dreams, and eventually he got a lucky break out of his back-breaking hard work. He tirelessly sent out glamorous shots of his square jaw face, and talent scout Henry Wilson ended up taking the bait. Wilson took on the young Roy Fitzgerald on as a client, but it ended up costing Hudson very dearly. Almost as soon as Wilson met the young boy, he changed his name to Rock Hudson, conjuring up an adventurous, masculine hero. There was just one problem. Hudson absolutely hated the name, but he kept his lips sealed and had to take up the mantle for the rest of his career. However, once Hudson finally got his foot in the door, he faced down one of his most chilling weaknesses. When Hudson was coming up in Hollywood, he struggled with a very necessary acting skill, remembering his lines. Despite this, however, he still managed to land a decent number of roles. Hudson started to get a reputation as the go-to man for adventurous B movies. But when he finally came face to face with his biggest break yet, he faced an on-set nightmare. Even on the set of his blockbuster Magnificent Obsession, Hudson was racked with nerves, and the consequences were horrifically embarrassing. While acting opposite his co-star Jane Wyman, Hudson still kept forgetting his lines. forcing scenes to go on for 30 or even 40 takes. Weinman's reaction to her leading man was unforgettable. Even though Weinman also had to do retakes whenever Hudson messed up, she never got frustrated or made him feel small, and Hudson was forever grateful for her kindness. Years later at a party, he approached her and confessed, "You were so nice to me when you didn't have to be, and I want you to know that I thank you and love you for it." Despite his behind-the-scenes struggles, Hudson powered through and stepped onto an exciting new path. In 1954, Hudson became a sensation. His work in the romantic drama Magnificent Obsession made practically everyone with a pair of eyes, well, obsessed with him. The film was a box office smash hit, and one magazine named Hudson as 1954's most popular actor. Fame had finally found Hudson, but fate had some disturbing curveballs to throw his way. Throughout all his years in Hollywood, Hudson struggled with his biggest secret: he was gay. Many co-stars and producers knew about his sexuality, but the public was entirely unaware, thanks in large part to his many handlers who suppressed the information in the papers. Even so, Hudson still had to go to disturbing lengths to keep it hidden. Without a doubt, Hudson's most famous film role was in the 1956 classic Giant alongside fellow idol James Dean and screen siren Elizabeth Taylor. Today, however, the film is infamous. It was the last of Dean's starring roles, and he tragically perished in a car crash before the flick was even finished. Yet this was far from the only scandal on set. Hudson and Taylor got along very well, but maybe a little too well. Hudson actually handpicked Taylor to be cast over Grace Kelly in the film, and the pair apparently spent the entire shoot living the dream and drinking martinis together until the crack of dawn. However, some of their late night hangouts were downright scandalous. Throughout the shoot, Hudson and Taylor lived across from one another in their private homes. According to witnesses, Taylor would make her way over to Hudson's backyard, dressed only in her negligee. Considering Taylor's skimpy attire, there's no doubt that their boozy drinks had some more scandalous things going on. James Dean and Hudson, however, were entirely a different story. In 1955, the secret of Hudson's bedroom preferences almost came to light in the most brutal way imaginable. Confidential magazine contacted Henry Wilson and threatened to expose Hudson's lifestyle to the public, complete with all of the glory details. In order to hush up the article, Wilson had to give up information about his other clients, yet Hudson paid an even higher price. Although Wilson let his other clients take the fall instead of Hudson, the burning threat still hung in the air. Very soon after Confidential nearly exposed him, Hudson took desperate measures to make sure it never happened again. As a result, his eyes swung over to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. Being with a woman would certainly be the perfect cover-up, or so he thought. After a shockingly brief courtship, Rock Hudson married his blushing bride, Phyllis Gates. However, this quickie wedding was one for the books. In fact, things moved so fast that Gates herself admitted she was surprised Hudson ever proposed. Though Gates insisted she was in love with Hudson and didn't marry him to cover up his identity, the couple was doomed to a heartbreaking end. Rock Hudson was all smiles at his wedding ceremony and reportedly said, "When I count my blessings, my marriage tops the list." Despite his seeming bliss, it didn't take long for his union to go up in flames. 3 years after tying the knot, Gates divorced Hudson in 1958, giving mental cruelty as a reason. Hudson, for his part, let her go quietly without making a fuss. Of course, there was far more to the story that met the eye, but it was only until much later that the truth beneath his only marriage bubbled to the surface. Hudson took many lovers throughout his life, with some of his longest-term partners being Mark Christian and his live-in publicist Tom Clark. Even some of the steamy affairs Hudson wasn't having almost ruined his life. In the early 1970s, a rumor went around that Hudson and his good friend Jim Nabors had married in a secret ceremony. Though Nabors was gay and very closeted, the pair really were only friends. Yet, after the vicious rumor spread, it destroyed their friendship forever. But as heady as his rumored affairs were, there was one hard-hitting romance that Hudson never forgot. In 1962, Rock Hudson met a dashing film extra named Lee Garlington. At the time, young Garlington had caught wind of the scandalous rumors about Hudson's preferences, and later admitted that it sparked his initial interest in the actor. There was an instant connection between the two men, but it wasn't until later that fate brought them together again. A year after they locked eyes on one another, a freshly single Garlington received a very intriguing call. It was one of Hudson's friends, asking if he had any interest in meeting the actor himself. For Garlington, his first meeting was utterly nerve-wracking. He showed up at Rock Hudson's Beverly Hills mansion, shaking in his shoes and completely unsure of what to expect. He had no clue that he was embarking on the wildest roller coaster of his life. Hudson's towering stature and handsome face were one thing, but his intimidating presence completely overwhelmed his young conquest. Garlington remembered that he offered him a drink, but nothing happened. Literally, I was too scared. He said, well, let's get together. And we did. After that surreal introduction, Hudson and Garlington threw themselves into a reckless relationship, but it wasn't without its risks. So began one of Hudson's most torrid affairs. In the evenings, he'd welcome Garlington into his home, spend the night with him, and then bid him adieu in the morning. His lover would leave just before dawn, sneaking out at 6 a.m. To avoid alerting the neighbors, Garlington would coast his Chevy Nova down the street, refraining from using the engine. Both parties thought themselves to be exceedingly clever and thinking they were experts of deception, but this wouldn't come without cost. Rock Hudson dared to bring Lee Garlington to movie premieres with him, but he made sure to take the necessary precautions. Both men always brought along a female date. Hudson was no fool. He knew that coming out would destroy his career, but that didn't mean that other Hollywood stars weren't aware of his darkest secret. Hudson and Garlington shared a simple love. They hung out at the mansion, went on spontaneous road trips, and visited country fairs. They relished in the moments when Hudson could slip through the fingers of his handlers. However, one trip in particular stood out. Hudson's good friend Liz Taylor recommended Puerto Vallarta as a getaway for the couple. She was right, the trip was unforgettable. While on vacation, Hudson let his guard down. The quiet beach town afforded the lovebirds with some rare time together. They strolled along the shore, snapping pictures of one another. Garlington later remembered, "We just lived the life of two normal gay men that loved one another. There were no paparazzi and no one knew we were there. We were just comfortable being us." But despite this fairy tale of not being seen, the couple still had a serious price for their love. There's only one picture of Hudson and Garlington together, a stolen snapshot taken at a New Orleans bar. Hudson's agent had explicitly instructed him to never have this picture taken with his boyfriend, as it would arouse suspicion and confirm the rumors. So, despite the intensity of Hudson's feelings, the actor had but a few mementos of his time with Garlington. Instead, he carried these heart-wrenching memories with him for the rest of his life, because in the end, their romance was never able to go the distance. In 1965, Garlington came to a heartbreaking revelation. Hudson wasn't everything he wanted in a partner. You see, behind the macho gruff, the actor was sensitive. As he said himself, Rock wasn't a real strong personality. He was a gentle giant. Garlington, meanwhile, was in search of a father figure, and Hudson just didn't fit the bill. But as we'll see, although they went their separate ways, this story wasn't over yet. Later, Hudson would come to haunt Garlington in the most devastating way. In Hudson's later years, a lifetime of repressing his true self took a horrible toll on the actor. Hudson became a heavy smoker and drinker, so much so that he suffered a heart attack in 1981 when he was only in his mid-50s. Even after experiencing the chilling medical scare, Hudson refused to give up his habits. However, considering his chilling fate, these were the least of his worries. In 1984, Hudson discovered a strange irritation on his neck and decided to go to the doctor for a routine visit to check it out. The diagnosis he got changed his life. It was no ordinary skin condition. It was called Kaposi sarcoma. Even worse, the doctor knew what that meant. Hudson had AIDS. Over the coming months, Hudson took his time coming to terms with the diagnosis. When he started losing weight and looking sick, the actor at first told people that he was suffering from anorexia. After all, not only was AIDS little understood at the time, he felt revealing his diagnosis would all but out him as gay. But whether he told his friends or not, he still had one incredibly hard thing to do. Over the next months, Hudson continued to work, all while secretly traveling to France to find a cure and try out experimental treatments. But the end was closing in. On July 21st, 1985, Hudson collapsed in a Paris hotel.
Though his publicist now claimed he had liver cancer, more and more people were starting to get suspicious.
By July 25th, 1985, Hudson was so sick that his publicist finally had to reveal the tragic truth. He was indeed dying of AIDS. The news rocked the world. Hudson was one of the first celebrities in history to openly admit that he had an AIDS diagnosis, and it fundamentally shifted the conversation about the misunderstood disease. However, besides the diagnosis, the public's reaction to the news was surprising. For all that, Hudson was terrified of disclosing his disease, and thus his identity as a gay man would have been revealed. However, after Hudson finally confessed his real illness, there was an outpour of love, grief, and support from his friends and fans. More than that, his announcement skyrocketed the amount of contributions people made to AIDS research. When Lee Garlington heard about Hudson's illness, he was crushed. He tried in vain to get in contact with Hudson, but the actor's caretakers dealt him a devastating blow. They informed Garlington that Hudson was so ill, he probably wouldn't even remember him. Gutted, he had no choice but to listen to their advice and think on the beloved memories of them together. But unfortunately, this moment gets even sadder. Down the road, Garlington decided to read Hudson's biography. He was devastated by what he read on the page. In it, Hudson referred to him as his true love. Garlington's reaction was harrowing. As he says, "I broke down and cried. I just lost it. He said his mother and I were the only people he ever loved. I had no idea I meant that much to him." One of the last people to ever see Hudson alive was his lifelong friend, Liz Taylor. After she saw Hudson strapped to an IV and slipping in and out of a coma, her response was absolutely heartbreaking. She became a tireless crusader for understanding and sympathizing with AIDS, and later pleaded to the public, "Please God, do not let him die in vain."
One person was utterly shocked to hear about the actor's diagnosis, Hudson's former lover, Mark Christian. Christian claimed that Hudson never told him about his disease and continued sleeping with him after he knew about his status.
Terrified that he also contracted it, Christian took immediate action and sued Hudson's estate for emotional distress. Luckily, Christian never tested positive, but he did win his case. Of course, Christian wasn't the only ex-boyfriend blindsided by this news. Hudson's long-lost love, Lee Garlington, never saw it coming. In Hudson's final days, he worried deeply about his soul. As a child, he was Roman Catholic, but later became an atheist. Nonetheless, in his last moments, he began to confess to a priest. In some of his last hours on Earth, Hudson repented his sins. Though we don't know exactly what he said, it may very well have been about his many secrets and gay identity, but the people will never know the truth. According to The Hollywood Reporter, just as their marriage was dissolving, Hudson's wife, Phyllis Gates, hired a private detective to record her confronting her husband about his bedroom preferences. The tape contents would have ruined Hudson. Gates questions him about his habits with boys and accuses him of picking men up off the street. But that's not all. This recorded confrontation began with Gates bringing up a Rorschach test that Hudson had taken. Because he'd both seen butterflies and snakes, she became more convinced than ever that her husband harbored an attraction to men. The image of the butterfly represented femininity, while the snake and its suggestive shape represented masculinity. She told Hudson that he had a problem and that he should do something about it. And that's when she brought up another scandalous subject matter. Hudson's wife had a bone to chew with him. She complained that their intimacy was always done at great speeds, asking him, "Are they that fast with boys?" Though Hudson denies picking anyone up, he answered her honestly about sleeping with men, saying he lasts longer with boys because boys don't fit. It's an incredibly frank conversation for a couple in the 1950s. Nonetheless, much later after this scandalous conversation, on October 2nd, 1985, Hudson passed away in his sleep while at home. He was 59 years old and just 6 weeks shy of his 60th birthday. According to his own wishes, his friends cremated his body immediately after his passing and never held a funeral in his honor. It didn't matter though, the world still joined together in mourning their idol. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed this story or stories alike, make sure to show some love by subscribing and liking this video. Stay tuned for some more informative and exciting stories like this one.